Hello everyone, I hope you all are doing fine. And guess what? Today we're gonna talk about direct and indirect teaching, and along with that, we're gonna discuss learner types. And at the end of the session, we'll move to individual differences, right? And so let's move to the first thing, direct and indirect teaching, right? So direct and indirect teaching are like two sides of a coin in the world of education, each with its unique approach to helping students learn, right? So let's move to first one, which is direct instruction or direct teaching. Sometime in the exam they ask about direct instruction, and the similar word is direct teaching. So sometime student can get confused because of these different terms, but they both mean the same, right? So starting with direct teaching or instruction, it's a kind of like a classic classroom scene you might see in movies or TV shows, right? Imagine a teacher standing in front of a class, chalk in hand, while a student sit and listening and taking notes, right? So this method is all about the teacher leading the way, right? Giving clear step by step instruction on a specific topic. It's like a chef demonstrating a recipe, right? So the teacher has a set up plan for the lesson and sticks to it, which can be kind of great for covering a lot of ground quickly. For example, think about learning the steps of a scientific experiment or the rules of grammar. So the teacher explains, gives examples, and also maybe write on the board, and then the students try it out themselves, right, following the exact steps they were taught. It's like learning to bake a cake by following a recipe exactly. You're like to get a good result if you follow the instruction, to the letter. But anyway, but this method isn't without its critic, right? Some say it's a bit rigid and doesn't leave much room for creativity or personalization. It's like every student is given the same ingredients and recipe regardless of whether they prefer chocolate or vanilla, right? Indirect teaching, or what you might call a student centered approach, is really about letting students become the main players in their learning journey. Picture a classroom where the teacher isn't just talking at the students, but instead they are more like a guide or a coach, right? So they're there to support and facilitate, but it's the students who are doing the real exploration, right? So in this way of teaching, students aren't just sitting and listening, right? They're actively engaged. They observe things, ask questions, and dig into the data to find answers, right? It's like being a detective in a classroom. The teacher sets up the scene, but it's the students who follow the clues and piece together the puzzle, right? So group work is pretty common here too. Imagine working with a few classmates to figure out why plants grow faster in certain conditions, or debating the motives of a character in a novel. It's all about getting hands on and collaborative, right? So now let's talk about how students actually learn in this setup. They don't just memorize facts or repeat what the teachers say, right? And instead they take the information and transform it, creating their own understanding and responses that might be totally new. It's kind of like taking a bunch of ingredients, right, and coming up with your own recipe, kind of a new way of understanding or applying that material, right? So indirect teaching shines when it comes to teaching abstract ideas or patterns. It's great for subjects where there isn't just one right answer, like in a philosophical debate or when you're trying to interpret a poem. It also works wonder for inquiry based learning. This is where students get to be little scientists, or kind of researchers, asking questions and seeking answers, Right. A classic example of this is a science fair project, right? So the teacher might introduce the concept of renewable energy, but then it's up to the students who come up with a project idea, like building a model wind turbine or designing an experiment to test how different materials affect solar panel efficiency, right? And they're not just learning about renewable energy, but they are also discovering it for themselves through trial, error, and creativity. So in this learning environment, the ultimate goal is to discover, right? Students are faced with problem or challenge and they have to figure out, right? And it's not just about finding the right answers, but understanding why it's the right answer, right? So the teacher's role is to help guide this discovery process without taking over. They might break the class into small groups, each tackling a different aspects of a problem, and then bring everyone together to share and discuss their findings. And some of the ways this kind of learning happens include discovery learning, where students uncover facts and principles for themselves, and cooperative learning, where they work together to learn and solve problems. Think about a history class where students work in groups to research different aspects of a historical event and then teach each other what they have learned, right? Like we already discussed in previous session about Bloom's taxonomy, right? A framework for categorizing educational goals fits right into this, right? So like analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, these are the things that we talked about, right? And these are the stages where students break down information, combine it in a new ways, and judge its value. It's like taking a complex puzzle, understanding each piece, figuring out how they fit together, and then stepping back to see the big picture, right? So in indirect instruction or teaching, teachers organize the content in a way that prompts students to use deductive, like general to specific. We talked about in research aptitude, right? And inductive, where we actually observe and come up with some kind of a specific to general, right? They present examples and non examples, drawing on a students' experiences and encourage them to ask questions and evaluate themselves. It's a dynamic, interactive way of learning that engages students on multiple levels, right? So, the beauty of indirect instruction is in how it mirrors real life learning, right? We often learn best not by being told something directly, right? But by experiencing it, questioning it, and making sense of it in our own way. And this approach equips students with the skills they need, not just for the classroom, but for life outside of it as well, right? So that was all about indirect instruction, guys. So now let's talk about another important section, characteristics of teaching. Well, teaching is so much more than just passing on knowledge, right? It's a commitment, a kind of educational leadership that's not just about what you teach, right? But how you teach it, right? So picture this, a classroom where every student, is hooked on every word the teacher says. Not just because the subject is interesting, but because of the teacher's passions for it, right? And that's what makes a real difference. Let me break it down. Imagine a teacher who's not just a fountain of knowledge, but also a catalyst for enthusiasm, right? They are the ones who come into the classroom buzzing with excitement about the day's topic. It's contagious, right? And students cannot help but be drawn in. And they use active learning methods like group discussions, brainstorming, and teamwork. It's not just about listening, right? It's about engaging. Think about it. When was the last time you really remembered something that you just heard versus something you discussed or worked on with others, right? So that shows that practical thing is quite important, right? But it's not just the what of teaching, it's the where and how. The classroom environment plays a huge role. A positive, encouraging space where students feel comfortable yet challenged is key, right? And teachers need to meet students where they are at, understanding their level and building from there. Communication is crucial. It's not about talking at students but talking with them, right? And again, there is another one like personal style. And personal style varies among teachers. Some are more laid back while others run a kind of tight ship, right? But at the end of the day, a good teacher knows how to present their lessons clearly and in a way that's appropriate for their students' age and understanding level. They're not just dumping information, right? They're making sure everyone gets it, no student left behind. Right. Then there is the teacher student relationship, which is also quite important. It's a two-way street of mutual respect. You can see it in action when a teacher shows genuine concern for their students, encourages them to think for themselves, and respects their individuality. It's about being adaptable, ready to switch things up if the usual approach isn't working. Assessment is another big part of the teaching. It's not just about grading, right? It's about understanding where students are struggling and helping them get past those hurdles. And think of it like a coach spotting where an athlete is stumbling and offering the right drills to overcome it. Right. And one of the coolest things about teaching is that it's not just a one way learning street, right? Great teachers are always learning from their students, from new research, from their experiences. They're constantly finding ways to improve their teaching game, right? And in the real world, these qualities make a huge difference. For instance, there is this math teacher I know who noticed his students were struggling with algebra. So instead of plowing ahead, he turned the lessons into a game, right? Creating real life scenario for them to solve. It wasn't long before those once baffled faces lit up with understanding, right? So another example is a history teacher who was all about dry facts and dates, right? But after noticing her students' eyes glazing over, she switched things up. She started using role plays to bring historical events to life. Suddenly, history wasn't just a subject, it was a story and experience. So, in summary, teaching is an art that blends knowledge with passion, understanding with enthusiasm, and respect with adaptability. It's about creating a space where learning is not just a necessity but an adventure. Right? Now, let me tell you about the basic requirements of teaching. Well, the first thing is the teacher, right? When the teaching process is happening, the first thing is the teacher, right? So, you know, teaching is all about guiding students. First of all, you should know whether they are in a grade school or college or helping them grasp new concepts and ideas. It's like being a navigator in their journey of learning. And to do this well, a teacher needs to be aware of few key elements. And let's break these down in simpler terms for you, right? So, the teacher, right? The first thing in the teaching process is the teacher. Think of the teacher as a knowledge chef, right? Mixing up information and values to serve to their students. They're not just teaching facts from a textbook, they're shaping young minds, right? Helping students grow in every way possible. Teacher need to be great communicators. Also, they need to speak in a way that sparks change in how their students think and behave, right? So in today's world where tech is a kind of king, right, a teacher should be the tech savvy to imagine, right? And imagine a teacher using cool apps or social medias to make a history lesson more relatable, or showing a science experiment through a virtual reality setup. How amazing it would be, right? And it's all about using modern tools to make learning engaging and fun. Right, the next is the learner. Well, teaching cannot happen without the learner, right? So students are like sponges, right, ready to soak up all the knowledge thrown at them. But they're not just passive listener also, right? They need to actively engage, ask questions, and be curious. Depending on their age, their learning needs and style kind of vary. For example, a primary school kid might love learning through songs and games, while a college students might prefer debates and research projects. It's like each age group has its own learning language, and good teaching involves kind of understanding and speaking this language effectively. Right. So, as we have already discussed about the teacher and the learner, the basic requirement of teaching, and this both cannot happen if there is no topic or the subject, right? The subject is the star of the show in teaching. It's what the whole process revolves around, right? While teachers usually pick the topic, sometimes students get a kind of say too, right? Making the learning more balanced and interesting. For example, a teacher might decide to teach about climate change, but the students might want to focus on renewable energy as a solution. So this kind of collaboration can lead to a fascinating discussion and projects, right? And let's not forget the teaching aids like charts, models, and all those cool technological tools that can turn a boring lecture into an exciting exploration, right? And the next is the environment. This is also very important requirement of teaching. So the right environment is crucial for learning, right? It's not just about having a well lit classroom with comfortable seats. It's about creating a space where students feel valued and inspired. In the past, students were often seen as the receiver of information, but now we know that their growth is deeply connected to the world around them. For example, a teacher might create a classroom garden project to teach biology, right? Or sustainability and responsibility, and showing how learning is connected to real world issues. So, teaching is a lot like conducting an orchestra where different elements come together to create a harmonious learning experience. Right, and we also have dependent variable and independent variable in the basic requirements of teaching. Let me tell you about it. First is dependent variable, right? Firstly, let's talk about the students. They're like the kind of instruments in our orchestra. We can consider them as the dependent variable in the teaching process, and you might be wondering why, right? So because their growth, their learning and development largely hinge on what? On the teacher's guidance, much like how the sound of an instrument depends on how it's played. For instance, think of a time when a teacher's unique way of explaining things made a complex topic crystal clear for you, right? And that's the teacher tuning your understanding, helping you hit the right note in your learning journey. Then there is teacher, right, who's independent variable, and they're like the conductor of the orchestra, leading and guiding. Teachers have the creative freedom to design lessons, choose teaching methods, and influence students' performance. Consider a scenario where a teacher decides to take the class outside for a lesson in nature, and this change of environment can stimulate students' interest and understanding in a subject like environment science, or showing how a teacher choices can shape the learning experience. Then there is intervening variable, and these are the various elements that help achieve the teaching goals, like the music score in our orchestra analogy, right? And these include curriculum, content, teaching methods, and techniques, and even the classroom environment. Imagine a history teacher using a role play to explain a historical event. So the role play method, which is kind of intervening variable, which can bring history to life, making it more engaging and memorable for students. Teaching needs to comply with some requirements that you can see over your screen. So teaching isn't just about delivering lectures, right? It requires a professional approach. It's like how a skilled conductor knows exactly how to lead their orchestra. Teaching need to be well prepared, knowledgeable, and able to adapt to different learning style and environment. So a suitable teaching environment is also crucial. Just as musicians perform best in a well-tuned auditorium, students learn best in a conductive environment. This can be a classroom that's well lit, has comfortable seating, and is equipped with the necessary learning tool, right? So the relationship between teacher and student is another vital aspect. It's like the rapport between a conductor and their musician. A positive, respectful relationship can create productive learning atmosphere where students feel valued and motivated, right? So student discipline and dedication are also the key to a successful learning process. It's similar to how discipline practice is essential for musician, right? When students are focused and committed, they engage more deeply with the learning material, leading to better outcome. Lastly, teachers' devotion to teaching is like a conductor passion for music. When teachers are passionate and dedicated, it shines through in their teaching and inspires students to learn and grow, right? So in summary, teaching is a dynamic and interactive process, much like in an orchestra performance. It involves blends of different variables, the student, the teacher, and the teaching method, all working in harmony to create a successful learning experience. Just as beautiful symphony captivates its audience, right? And effective teaching can leave a lasting impact on students, shaping their minds and futures, right? So, guys, that was all about the requirements of teaching. Now we'll talk about one of the most important topic is learner, right? We already talked about teacher, we talked about different kind of theories and all this stuff. Now let's focus our shift to learner, right? Learning is essential like picking up a new stuff, right? It could be a knowledge or how to do things or value or even changing the way we think and feel. It's not just us human who learn, right? Animals and even machines are on the learning journey. And some plants show kind of signs of learning too, and learning can happen quickly from a single event. Think about touching a hot stove and immediately learning that it's not a good idea to you know put your hands over the stove, right? So but most of the time learning is a process. It takes practice and repeated experiences. For instance, think about learning to ride a bike. At first, it might seem impossible, but with time and practice, it becomes second nature, right? And now the learning process is a kind of quite dynamic. It involves some of the important, key part. And can you guess what are these? Attention, awareness, memory, recollection, language, linguistic, all this stuff. Let me tell you about the attention and awareness. But this is like tuning into a radio station, right? You need to pay attention to learn something new. For example, if you're learning to play the guitar, you need to focus on the strings, the chords, and also the rhythm, right? And next is memory and recollection, and this is like your brain storage system. You store information and bring it back when you need it. Remember cramming for exams and then recalling that information when needed. That's your memory at work, right? Next is language and linguistics. So this involves understanding and using language. It's like when you learn a new word and then start to see and use it everywhere you go, right? And then is a processing and organizing. So this is about making sense of information, and also putting them in order. Think about sorting a jigsaw puzzle. You find pieces and figure out where they fit, right? Then there is another, the graphomotor system, which is writing. Remember that this is the physical part of writing. Remember, when you first learned to write your name, it was all about coordinating your hand movement, right? Then higher order thinking. What is this? This is the more complex stuff like analyzing, evaluating, and creating. It's like when you write an essay, you gather information, right, from your own opinion first and then put it all together in a structured way. But learning isn't just about these processes, right? Learning is also about emotions, the environment like your classroom, your behavior, your social skills, your teachers, your family, and all whoever play a part, right? For example, feeling relaxed and supported can make learning a new language easier, right? While stress can make it harder. So learning is more than just memorizing facts. It's a journey that can last a lifetime, right? And it opens up new opportunities and shows that with effort and time you can pick up a new skill and improve your life, right? Imagine learning to cook. At first you might burn a few dishes, right? But over time you could become a great cook. And that's the beauty of learning. The more you do it, the more you realize anything is possible, right? And now one of the important section that we're going to focus, the types of the learning process, right? And we have two main types of learning. Remember, associative and non-associative, right? And it's a kind of like how we learn things in different ways depending on the situation. First, let me tell you about the non associative learning, and this is a bit like learning on autopilot. You don't need to make a conscious connection between two things, it's more about how you respond to something over time. There are two types of non associative learning: habituation and sensitization. And you might have heard about that habituation, right? So this is like, getting used to a new alarm sound on your phone. At first it might startle you or catch your attention every time it goes off, but after a time or after some time you get used to it. It doesn't bother you as much, right? Or maybe you don't even notice it after some time. That's habituation. When your response to a repeated stimulus like the alarm sound, this can decrease over time. Next is sensitization, and this is the opposite. It's like your reaction getting stronger instead of weaker, right? Let's say you're expecting a really important call. You might start by being a little alert to your phone ringing, but as time goes on, you get more and more sensitive to the sound, right? Every ring might make you jump, thinking it's the call you have been waiting for, right? And this heightened response is sensitization. And next, we're going to talk about associative learning. And let me tell you about this, that this one is about making connection between things. It's like your brain is a detector figuring out that two things are related. And there are two main types also: classical conditioning and operant conditioning, that we have already discussed in our previous session on teaching theory and learning approaches, and that you should go and watch, right? And let me tell you a little bit about classical conditioning because we have already discussed in depth, right? So this is a kind of famous one thanks to our Pavlov. We already talked about Pavlov and his dog, right? Basically it's when you learn to associate two things together. In Pavlov experiment, he rang a bell every time he fed his dogs, right? After a while, just the sound of the bell would make the dogs salivate, right? Even if there was no food, they learn to connect the bell with food. It's like if you start craving popcorn every time you see a movie trailer, right? Because you have associated movie watching with, and eating popcorn, right? And next is operant conditioning, that we have talked about the Skinner, right? So this is about learning from the consequences of your actions. It's like when you get a reward for doing something good or punishment for something bad, and that kind of, influence how you behave in the future, right? A simple example is training a pet. If your dog sits when you say sit and you give it a treat, the dog learns that sitting or kind of it is on commands get kind of yummy rewards, and that's operant conditioning, learning based on rewards or punishment, right? So these two we have already discussed in depth in our previous session, that you should definitely go and watch, right? And it's very informative, and in exam they ask question based on that. Right. So these learning processes are pretty cool when you think about it, right? So they show how we adapt and respond to our environment, whether it's getting used to things, reacting more strongly, or learning from the connections and consequences in our lives. Right. And next we're going to talk about other types of learning. Right. And we'll start with observational and then we'll just move one by one. Right. So let's start with observational learning. So this is like when you pick up habits or a skill just by watching others. Like learning to cook by watching your mom in the kitchen, right? You don't need someone to formally teach you. Instead, you just learn by observing and mimicking, right? It's like when a little brother starts copying his big sister's way of talking because he's always around her, right? Next up is active learning. This is all about taking control of your learning. It's like when you're studying for an exam and you make a kind of, list of things and things you really kind of, weak on, right? And this way you can focus on what you need to learn more about, right? It's like realizing you're good at algebra but need more practice with geometry. So you spend more time solving geometry problems. Next, we're going to talk about episodic learning, and this happens through experience, right? Imagine you were scared by a dog when you were little, and now you feel nervous around dogs, and that fear is a result of episodic learning from that one incident that happened, right? Next, we're going to talk about enculturation. It is about picking up the values and behavior of your culture, like learning to greet people with a handshake in many western culture, right? Or with a bow in Japan, and it's the stuff you learn just by being part of the society, right? And next, learning through play and sports, right? It is a pretty straightforward. It's like learning teamwork and leadership on a soccer team, a problem solving skills when playing strategy games, right? Next is multimedia learning. It is all about using different senses to learn, like watching a video to understand how a volcano erupt and then listening to a podcast about volcanoes. It's combining seeing and hearing to a better grasp of the topic, right? Next, we're going to talk about imprinting, right? And this is a rapid learning at a specific life stage, right? And it's a bit different. It's about learning something quickly at a specific time in life, right? And next we're going to talk about e-learning and augmented learning, that you already know, right? And it refers to using digital tools and technologies for learning. E-learning could be taking an online course, while augmented learning might involve using an app that overlays information about the stars when you point your phone at the night sky, right? Next, we're going to talk about rote learning, that we already talked about in memory level learning, right, in our pedagogy section. So that rote learning is about memorizing facts just as they are, right? Like memorizing multiplication table or the periodic table without understanding them deeply, right? Then meaningful learning. So what is that meaningful learning? Well, it's when you really get the gist of what you're learning. It's like, not just memorizing a historical date, but understanding why that event was important and how it connects to other events, right? Next, we're going to talk about evidence based learning. In short, it is EBE, which is about, using methods that have been proven to work in scientific studies, right? It's like when teachers use a strategy in the classroom that research shows are effective in helping students learn. Right, then we have formal learning. Well, it happens in a structured environment like a school or with a teacher and a curriculum, right? Right, next we're going to talk about non-formal learning. It's more like learning in clubs or workshops where it's a structure but not part of formal education system. And informal learning is a kind of most relaxed kind of way to learn, right? It's when you learn from everyday life, like watching YouTube tutorials on how to fix a bike or learning a new language by speaking to friends who are native speakers, right? Next is tangential learning. It is a pretty cool. It happens when you get so interested in a topic you have encountered casually, like a historical event you saw in a movie, right? That you start researching it on your own. Next is dialogic learning. It is all about learning through conversation and dialogues. It's like when you have a deep discussion with your friends about a book you all read, right? And everyone's perspective help you to understand it better. Next is we have concept based learning, and this actually focuses on understanding broad concepts rather than just memorizing facts. It's like learning the concept of justice in a civics class and then discussing different laws on how they apply to this concept, right? And finally we have content based learning, and also we have problem based learning, right? So these are all about learning in context, right? Different contexts, like content based learning or content based instruction in simple CBI might involve learning a new language by studying a subject like history in that language, right? And the problem based learning is like when students learn science by tackling a real world problem, like figuring out how to reduce waste in their school, right? So guys, that was all about the types of learner or learning. Let me tell you about the characteristics of learner. So guys, let's continue about the characteristics of learner, right? So learning is all about understanding how different people observe, process and retain knowledge, right? Each learner has a unique combination of academic, social or cognitive traits that make them who they are, right? Think of learners like character in a video game. Each has their own special abilities and preference, right? Just like a game designer tailors a game to suit different player types, instructional designers create education plans that cater to various learner profile, right? And let's talk about enthusiastic learner, right? And those who are always eager, ask tons of questions and don't mind staying late to get things right? And their enthusiasm and hard work pay off, helping them grasp concept faster. It's like someone who's always played sports picking up a new game quickly. Their past experiences give them a head start, right? And prior experience matters a lot also. Why? Imagine trying to learn how to drive a car. If you already know how to ride a bike, you're a kind of somewhat familiar with balancing and steering, which makes learning to drive a bit easier, right? And similarly, a learner's past knowledge in a subject can make new concepts easier to understand. And cognitive level of aptitude is another big factor. It's about how learners think and solve problems. Some are great at memorizing fact, while others are better at figuring out puzzles or understanding complex theories. Think of it like different people, being good at different games. Some are good at strategy games while others are unbeatable at memory games, right? So learners are also influenced by their stage of development. For instance, younger learners might need more concrete example and can't handle abstract concept as well as adult, right? And it's like how younger kids enjoy simple games, while older people might prefer something more challenging. Then high motivation often leads to quicker learning, right? And it's like being determined to beat a tough level in a game. You keep trying different strategy until you succeed. And people who are really into what they are learning will often find ways to overcome challenges more quickly, right? Personal characteristics are huge too. Factors like age, gender, socio-economic background, and even specific skills or disabilities play a part in how a person learns, right? It's like how two players might approach the same game differently based on their personal experiences and preferences, right? Then academic characteristics focus on the learner's goals, and their prior knowledge and education level. And it's similar to how a gamer might have different objectives in a game, like completing all levels, finding all the secrets, or just enjoying the story. Social and emotional aspects are also crucial, right? And this includes how learners interact with others, their self-image, and feelings of self-efficacy. Imagine a multiplayer game, where some players are leaders, others are supporter, and everyone has a different level of confidence in their gaming abilities. Right, then we have cognitive characteristics, which are also about how the brain works, how we pay attention, remember things, and solve problems, right? This is like how different gamers use different strategy and have varying attention spans or reaction times, right? The setting where learning happens matters a lot. A comfortable, supportive environment makes learning easier, just like playing a game in a familiar room with friends is more relaxing than playing in a noisy and crowded place, right? And finally, learning is a lifelong and ever changing process. It's not just about classroom and textbook, right? Real world experiences are also invaluable, and think of it as an open world game where you keep discovering new areas and challenges as you play, right? And learning involves solving problems, acquiring new information, and going beyond just thinking. It's about doing and experiencing, right? So that was all about the characteristics of learner, right? And let me tell you about the characteristics of adolescent learner. Very important, because in exam they ask questions sometime based on that particular learner, right? Adolescent. So we'll talk about it. So these learners are a unique bunch, each one navigating a whirlwind of changes and experiences. Physically, they are dealing with hormonal ups and downs that can leave them feeling like they're on roller coaster, right? And 1 minute they're full of energy, and the next they are exhausted, right? And it's the time of rapid growth where they're suddenly taller or their voice changes, right? And which can be pretty confusing and sometimes embarrassing. You'll often find them bumping into things or people not quite used to their new body, right? And let's not forget the new social dynamics that come with developing sexual awareness, and their bodies are changing, and so are their eating habits, sometimes healthy, sometimes not so much. It's not unusual to see an awkward run or a clumsy catch during gym classes, right? Thanks to these physical changes. Next, we'll talk about the intellectual, right? And intellectual development. And these teens are in a whole new ball game. They are starting to think more abstractly, moving away from the black and white thinking of their younger years. Curiosity is their middle name. They are into everything and anything. Though they might not stick with one interest for too long, give them a challenge, and they'll shine, especially if it's something that gets them out of their seats and actively involved. They are a big kind of learning with their friends and love a good discussion or in a group project. However, they're also figuring out who they are, right? And which means they might question everything from the class plan to your taste in jokes, and sometimes their humor can come off as a bit of sarcastic or even harsh. Socially, it's all about finding their place in the peer group. They're constantly experimenting with new ways to talk and act. Sometimes trying on different, personas, like they're going out of style, right? And they're also exploring their racial, ethical, and sexual identity, and which can be a visible or more private journey. Remember how daunting the first day of middle school felt, right? And they are right in the thick of that. and they are like to latch onto the latest trend, whether it's a new TikTok dance or the latest slang, right? And they can be pretty sensitive too. A teasing remark or an embarrassing moment can feel like the end of the world for them, right? So emotionally and psychologically, these years are intense for them also, because their moods can swing wildly, right? And sometimes they just need to let off steam with some spontaneous activities. They're striving for independence, yet they're still figuring out who they are and where they fit into the adult world, right? They are hyper aware of themselves, which means they can take criticism pretty hard, whether it's about their latest TikTok video or their performance in class, right? They often think they are the only ones going through tough times, making their experiences feel all the more intense. They're also keen to impress their friends and might go to great lengths to get noticed. Very important, right? And when it comes to moral development, guys, adolescents are in a phase of questioning and analyzing everything from societal norms to their family's value, right? They're learning about democracy and often feel frustrated with how slow change can be, right? They look up adults who are genuine and dependable, even as they seek to make their own decisions, right? And they can be quick to judge others but slower to see their own shortcomings, right? And they're increasingly aware of the world around them, showing concern for issues like animal rights and environmental conservation, right? So in summary, adolescence is a time exploration, growth, and sometimes confusion, right? And it's a roller coaster ride for physical, intellectual, social, emotional, and moral development. Now, let me tell you the characteristics of adult learners, right? Very important. Now we have already discussed about the adolescent. Now we can go into the adult learner. Well, adult learners often bring a unique and practical perspective to education. They're usually focused on solving real world problems and tend to seek out educational opportunity that promises specific tangible outcomes. For instance, a working professional might enroll in a management course not just for the sake of learning, but to enhance their leadership skills and apply them directly in their current job, right? And unlike traditional students, adult learners often prefer to take charge of their own learning journey. They are self-directed, value the freedom to choose what, how, and when they learn. For example, a mother returning to education after a break might opt for online courses, right, that fit into her busy schedule. Choosing subject directly improve her job prospects. Skepticism is another trait common among adult learners that typically don't accept new information at face value. Instead, they like to test and apply new knowledge to ensure it's valid and useful in their context, right? A good example is a business owner who attends a marketing workshop. They're likely to critically evaluate new marketing strategies presented in the workshop before implementing them in their business, right? And relevance and timeless are crucial for adult learners also. You know why? Because they tend to engage more with education that aligns with their current needs and situation. For instance, an IT professional might be more interested in a course on the latest programming languages rather than a generic computer science course, as it offers immediate benefits to their career. So lastly, adult learners take responsibility for their own learning, especially when they see its value and relevance. For example, a nurse might pursue additional certificates, in patient care management because they recognize the direct impact it will have on their ability to provide better care and advance in their career, right? So, in essence, adult learners are motivated, goal oriented, and practical. They approach education with clear purpose, seeking knowledge that is immediately applicable and beneficial to their personal and professional lives, right? And now, guys, let's move and talk about individual difference. Quite important that we're gonna talk about, right? And we'll also talk about this, factors affecting teaching and we'll put this in that also, so we can have like depth discussion in our next session. But today I'll just give you a highlight about the individual differences, right? And individual differences are all about how each person is unique in their own way. Think of it like everyone you meet has their own kind of mix of qualities and characteristics that make them who they are, right? And this could be in how they think, look, and what they are good at, and even how they learn and react to things. It's kind of like how each person is a unique blend of ingredients in a recipe. When we talk about individual differences, we are looking at how people vary in everything from their physical abilities to their personalities, habits, and even their thought process, right? And it's like noticing how one friend might be good at sports, and while other is a kind of whiz at math or has a knack for making people laugh, right? Some people might learn best by seeing things, they are visual learners, right? And while others might prefer listening, which is auditory learners, right? And or doing things hands on, that is your kinesthetic learners, right? And let's take the classroom as an example, right? In any class you'll find a mix of students. Some might grasp concepts quickly while others need a bit more time, right? Some might be great at working in groups while others do better on their own. It's like having a mix of different plants in a garden, each needing different amounts of sunlight and water to thrive, right? And these differences aren't just about learning, right? They are seen in every part of life. Think about your family and friends. Maybe your brother is super organized, always keeping his things in order, while you might be more laid back and spontaneous, right? Or think about people's reaction to a scary movie. Some might be hiding behind a pillow, or while others are on the edge of their seat, right, loving every single minute. Even physical traits like height, athletic abilities, or how we look are part of these individual differences. It's like how some people are naturally great at basketball because they are tall, right, while others might be fantastic at gymnastics because they are more flexible, right? And it's not just about what we are born with, our experiences, like where we grew up, our culture, and also our family background. These kind of play a huge role too. For instance, someone who grew up in multilingual family might find learning new language easier, right? Or consider how a person who's traveled a lot might have a different perspective on a world compared to someone who hasn't, right? So individual differences also cover how we handle our emotions and what interests us. Like some of your friends might love horror movies while you prefer comedies, right? Or how some people might stay calm under pressure while others get more anxious. And personality is also kind of big part too, right? And it's like how some people are naturally more outgoing and love being the center of attention, right, while others are more like reserved and prefer listening to others, right? So in a nutshell, individual differences mean that each person is a unique mix of traits, abilities, and experiences. It's what makes the world interesting, right? With so many different people bringing their own special something to the table, right? So guys, that's all for today. In our next session, we're going to talk about factors affecting teaching, which is quite important, a section that we have to cover. So be there and have a good day. Bye bye.